He got a brand new Lexus at graduation. I got a box of broken pencils, literally, but today he works for me. And if you've ever been overlooked, silenced, or told your dreams were stupid, this story will change how you see everything. My name is Eli Martin. I'm 29, born and raised in Boston, and this is not the story people expect when they look at someone like me, someone they think grew up with everything. Because sometimes the grandest homes hide the quietest sorrows, and mine. It hid plenty. From the outside, we were the perfect family. My stepfather, David, was a highly respected real estate investor, buttoned-up strategic, a man whose name carried weight at board meetings. My mother, Karen, ran a luxury spa chain. She was always immaculate, commanding the kind of woman who turned heads in restaurants and rarely repeated herself. Then there was Caleb, my older brother. Tall, handsome, brilliant, he was the son parents dream of and the one they never stopped talking about. Caleb wasn't just good at everything, he was magnetic. He made people feel like they were in the presence of someone destined for something great, and maybe he was. As for me, I lived in the spaces between their expectations. From a young age, I was fascinated by design shapes, light, the silence of empty rooms. I'd draw for hours, sketching homes, reimagining buildings I passed on the street. I didn't know what architecture really was then, just that it made me feel like I had control in a world where everything else was assigned. It was how I stayed grounded. I remember one time, I must have been 8, I showed my mom a sketch of a little glass cabin I dreamed of building someday. She glanced at it for 2 seconds before returning to her emails. "That's cute," she said. "But dreams don't pay rent, Eli." When Caleb graduated from high school, it was a full production. Garden lights, string quartets, speeches, laughter. And then came the Lexus, shiny black topped with a red bow. A gift from David. Flashbulbs popped. Toasts were raised. In the midst of it all, my mother turned to me and handed me a gift neatly wrapped, palm-sized. "You still like drawing, right?" she smiled. It was a used pencil set. The erasers worn, the wood-nicked ones snapped clean in 2. She meant well, I think, but I understood the message. Caleb got a future. I got a hobby. That night after the party, I sat in my room with the box on my lap, the glow of the street lamp spilling shadows across the floor. I examined the pencils carefully. They weren't tools, they were reminders of where I stood, of what I wasn't meant to be. I didn't hate my brother. I still don't. But admiration doesn't erase hurt. I knew then that in our house, love was measured in accomplishments, in charisma, in polish. Caleb was the show, I was backstage, but I also knew this: I wasn't going to live in that shadow forever. If they wouldn't see me, I'd draw my own light. I'd find my own frame. And this is how it all began. If my childhood was defined by being overlooked, then my early adulthood was shaped by secrecy. A double life I chose to live because revealing the truth felt too dangerous, too fragile. After high school, Caleb went off to study abroad in London, armed with recommendation letters, private tutors, and all the praise money could buy. He majored in international business, a perfect path toward inheriting David's empire. Every conversation at the dinner table became about Caleb's classes, his internship at a boutique hotel chain, the networking events he attended. Even thousands of miles away, he filled every room in our house. I, on the other hand, enrolled at a public university in Massachusetts. Not because I lacked ambition, but because ambition for me had to be financed by late-night shifts and half-broken laptops. I majored in finance to appease my mother. A sensible choice, she'd said with a rare smile. "One day you'll thank us when you're not starving." But my real education began in the quiet corners of the Boston Public Library. I'd head there after class, surrounded by grand marble pillars and dusty sunlight, and devour books on architecture, CAD software tutorials, spatial psychology, and design theory. I'd print plans using student credits and scribble adjustments during train rides. There in the stillness, I found a kind of sanctuary. To help with bills, I took a part-time job at a tiny, almost forgotten art gallery on the edge of Beacon Hill. It smelled like linseed oil and old books. The owner, Frank, gray-bearded and quiet, watched me sketch between customers. He never pried, just observed. One night when the gallery was empty, he leaned over and tapped my notebook. "You've got someone living inside you," he said quietly. "Don't forget to feed him." That sentence echoed for days. It was the first time in years. Someone saw past my mask. Frank didn't know my past, my family, or my struggle for recognition. But in those few words, he gave me permission to believe that I could be more than just a background character in my own life. While Caleb sent home photos from London rooftops, I scraped together money by designing flyers for local cafes and helping friends redecorate their dorm rooms on a shoestring budget. At school, I was just Eli Martin, finance major. But at night, in my tiny rented room with mismatched furniture and paper sketches pinned to the walls, I became something else, an architect in training, feeding a vision no one else could see. The balancing act was exhausting. During the day, I memorized corporate tax codes. At night, I watched YouTube tutorials on SketchUp and Revit until my eyes burned. There were moments I wanted to quit, moments when my mother's voice echoed in my head. "Be realistic, Eli. There's security and structure." But I wasn't looking for security. I was looking for meaning, for a way to bring to life the spaces I imagined as a boy with that broken pencil set. Things came to a head during winter break of sophomore year. Over dinner, my mother handed me a pamphlet for a summer accounting internship and said, "David can pull a few strings. You'd be a shoo-in." I hesitated. I was thinking about applying for a design fellowship. Her face hardened. "Design? You're still chasing that nonsense." David didn't even look up from his phone. "Be practical, son. Finance is a foundation. Design is a luxury." I nodded and said nothing. But inside, something snapped. I realized I could never convince them. Not with arguments, not with achievements. My dreams were invisible to people who never tried to see them. So I stopped trying. I didn't tell them when I applied to a local architecture studio for a volunteer role. I didn't mention the late nights I spent drafting proposals for student competitions. I kept my two worlds separate, finance by day, architecture by soul. And in that quiet rebellion, I found my rhythm. Frank became something of a silent mentor, offering encouragement with simple nods or a cup of strong coffee left on the counter. "Most people live their whole lives ignoring the voice inside," he told me once, unprompted. "You're listening. That's rare." By the end of my third year, I had a small portfolio of mock projects, a revamped bookstore layout, a redesign of a neighborhood park, even a conceptual plan for converting an abandoned church into a co-working space. None of it was published, none of it praised, but it was mine. I remember one night vividly. I was walking home after closing the gallery, snow crunching beneath my boots, a sketch tube strapped across my back like a soldier's rifle. I paused outside a luxury condo development, one of David's. The lights glowed behind tall glass panes. I knew the kind of cold calculations that built those walls. I whispered to the night one day, "I'll build something warmer." No one heard me, but that didn't matter. Because I did. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when I found out my name had made the shortlist for the statewide student design showcase. I remember sitting at the old work table in Frank's framing shop, dust floating through sunlight beams like ghosts when the email came in. The subject line, "Congratulations, Eli Martin," looked almost suspicious in my inbox, like it had been delivered to the wrong person. Frank, my part-time boss and full-time silent cheerleader, was wiping down an antique canvas. I read the email aloud in a whisper. "You made it?" he asked, eyebrows raised, a grin already creeping across his face. "I did," I said, still stunned. I actually did. That contest had been the first thing I ever submitted under my real name, no pseudonyms, no borrowed credentials, just me. I'd spent 3 weeks crafting the submission, a concept for a youth library that doubled as a mental wellness center. Designed with fluid curves and warm textures, it was my love letter to solitude, the kind I knew too well. Local press picked up on the results. A brief mention in the Boston Architectural Digest's student column, nothing front page, but for me it was monumental. For once, I wasn't drawing in the shadows. I was seen, and then silence. About 2 weeks later, a classmate named Jordan texted me a link. "Is this your sketch?" the message read, followed by a screenshot from a corporate workshop recap. The headline read, "Young Visionary Brings Strategic Perspective to Development Design." Beneath it, Caleb's photo, beaming, polished sleeves rolled, and beside it a blueprint that looked eerily familiar. No, not just familiar. It was mine. I clicked the article. The event was hosted by a subsidiary of our stepfather David's company, an elite workshop meant to spotlight rising stars in real estate design. According to the write-up, Caleb had presented a concept for a community-rooted innovation hub for youth development. He'd adjusted some elements, tightened the curves, changed the name, but the bones were unmistakable. My bones. I sat there numb, rereading the article. My concept, my structure, my name absent. I didn't confront him immediately. I needed to breathe. I walked the length of the Charles River that night, heart pounding with questions and teeth clenched around the scenes I'd known since childhood. And then finally I called. "Hey," I said, "saw that article. The workshop. Looks like it went well." There was a beat. "Oh yeah," Caleb replied, casual. "You saw that?" I didn't answer. He chuckled. "I mean, it's just a workshop, not a big deal. I sort of borrowed your sketch as a starting point, hope that's cool." "You're always doing cool stuff, figured I'd build off of it. It's not like it's public or anything." "It was public," I said evenly. "It's in print." Another pause. Then, "Dude, relax. It's not like they're gonna develop it. It was just for show. Besides, no one knows. But I knew." This wasn't the first time Caleb had borrowed things, my hoodie, my lyrics back in high school, even my ideas when we were kids, and built pillow forts, but this was different. This was professional. This was theft. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just hung up. Frank noticed something was off when I showed up to work the next day. I was quieter, sharper with my measurements, fumbling with corner clamps. He didn't press, just handed me a new frame and said, "Don't let a thief steal your fire, kid." And I didn't. I bottled that rage, let it age like wine, let it simmer into focus, because that moment, Caleb's easy theft and easier dismissal, was the first time I truly understood what people meant when they said talent wasn't enough. That the world didn't always reward the originator. That sometimes the spotlight shines brightest on the loudest voice, not the clearest vision. But I also learned something else. I didn't need their spotlight. I could build my own, one design at a time. I didn't expect the moment that changed everything to begin with a coffee spill. It happened at an architecture and design symposium hosted at a downtown Boston hotel. I had barely scraped together the registration fee with Frank's help, and I showed up late, my portfolio shoved into an old canvas messenger bag that frayed at the edges. While weaving through the crowd between talks, I turned too fast, bumped into someone, and the iced coffee I had been balancing on my folder tipped over, spilling directly onto the heels of a woman in a crimson pantsuit. "I'm so sorry," I stammered, pulling napkins from my pocket like a panicked magician. The woman looked down, then up, arching an eyebrow. "That's one way to introduce yourself," she said. That was how I met Mira Reyes. She wasn't just a name in the industry, she was the name. Known for revolutionizing hospitality interiors, she designed boutique hotels that felt more like personal experiences than properties. Bold, intuitive, and unapologetic Mira was everything I'd been taught not to be. What surprised me was that she stayed. She let me dry her shoe, then asked to see my portfolio since I clearly had something to prove. We sat on a bench outside the exhibit hall and she flipped through my sketches, renderings, and the model photos I had printed at school. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she closed the folder and looked me straight in the eyes. "You've got the hands of a craftsman and the soul of a storyteller," she said. "But you're playing safe, scared. Architecture doesn't belong to the polite, it belongs to the brave." That sentence burned into my chest. 3 weeks later, she called and offered to mentor me. "No guarantees, no handouts, but if you're serious, I'll be in your corner." I was in. With Mira's quiet guidance, I started Studio Numa, named after the Roman king known for wisdom over war. It was nothing more than a rented basement studio with peeling paint and borrowed furniture. But to me it felt like a cathedral. I kept my day job and my student loans, but nights were for building. My first client came from Frank, a friend of his, who owned a small rundown coffee shop in Cambridge. The budget was laughable. The space was worse. But the challenge that thrilled me. I used salvaged wood from a renovation site, thrift store, mirrors. Crates turned into tables. I sketched on recycled paper, cut mock-ups from cereal boxes, hand-painted murals at night while the owner closed early to let me work. I learned to pour concrete and sew upholstery. I got splinters, cuts, migraines, but also a rush I had never felt before. Every decision was mine. Mira visited once during the renovation. She walked slowly through the half-finished room, taking in the exposed beams, the custom-built counter from repurposed doors. She nodded. "It's rough, but it breathes." Those words kept me going. Meanwhile, Caleb had returned from London with a bold new plan, launching a real estate tech startup. David was quick to back him with a 6-figure seed investment and the family PR team. There were press releases, glossy headshots, and networking brunches. The company promised to disrupt spatial planning. 6 months later, the project floundered. The app had bugs, their beta clients bailed, and the pitch lacked cohesion. By the end of the year, they quietly shut down operations. And yet at the holiday dinner, David clapped Caleb on the back. "Takes guts to launch something, son. Every failure's a setup for a bigger win." Karen chimed in. "We're proud of you. You were thinking big." I sipped my water and said nothing. No one asked what I was doing. No one knew about Studio Numa. No one had stepped into the cafe I redesigned, now packed with students and freelancers posting photos on Instagram with captions like, "Best coffee corner in Cambridge." But Mira knew, and I knew. I wasn't building a brand, I was building proof. Proof that I didn't need validation to create something that mattered. Proof that I could shape beauty from nothing. Proof that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't crazy for believing in the boy who once dreamed in shadows. They say validation doesn't matter when you believe in your work, but they've never seen their name printed on the cover of a national magazine. It was a Tuesday morning when I opened my inbox to find a message from Chicago Design Quarterly. I blinked twice before opening it, assuming it was a newsletter or a subscription pitch. But there it was, my name in the subject line attached to a PDF proof. The bar I had redesigned, the hollow, had landed the cover. The cover. The title read, "Seeing Soul in Steel and Light, Eli Martin's Revival of Industrial Warmth." My heart raced as I stared at the page. A photo of the bar's centerpiece, a light installation made from repurposed steel beams and warm Edison bulbs, took up half the spread. The article described how I had captured nostalgia without falling into mimicry and called my work unapologetically human in an age of digital polish. I sat in silence for a long time. Frank was the first to know. He whooped so loudly in the framing shop that he scared off 2 customers. Mira texted a single sentence. "Told you the world would catch on." For the first time, I allowed myself to believe I was no longer whispering into the void. My voice, my vision had finally echoed. The recognition brought inquiries. Not overwhelming, but steady: a local theater, a co-working startup, a bridal studio. But Mira had her eyes set higher. "I know what you're capable of," she said over dinner one night. "It's time we test the room." That's when she told me about the Palmera East pitch. Palmera was a rising hotel brand looking to expand with a 4-star chain targeted at younger travelers. Sustainability-focused, culturally rooted, and design-driven. They were opening proposals for 5 flagship locations and had invited 4 firms to submit concept visions. Mira had heard from a contact that a 5th wildcard spot was open. "You should apply," she said, pushing her wine glass aside. I blinked. "Mira, I'm still operating out of a basement." "You're not applying with your address," she replied. "You're applying with your imagination." The next 3 weeks were a storm of caffeine sketches, site research, and sleepless nights. I built a full proposal complete with 3D models, sustainability matrices, sensory experience maps, even scent programming for lobby diffusion. Every inch of the concept reflected the belief that hotels could be more than a stop; they could be emotional landmarks. I submitted with 2 hours to spare. Days later, Mira called. "You're on the short list." I sat down, but she wasn't done. "There's something else," she added. "One of the other shortlisted companies, Aurelius Interiors, that's David's design arm. Caleb's running the bid." It hit me like a steel beam. The same brother who had once stolen my sketch now stood across the field again, with the advantage of legacy funding and full boardroom access. Mira's voice softened. "You can pull out if this feels complicated." I shook my head. "No. If I back away now, I'll always be the shadow." The Palmera East pitch session was structured like a competition reality show. Each firm would present to a panel of investors, developers, and Palmera execs. The final decision would be based on vision, innovation, and alignment with the brand's ethos. What I didn't know, at least not immediately, was that Caleb had already begun lobbying to eliminate Studio Numa from contention. I heard it from a junior designer working in another firm. Caleb had made casual comments in meetings about me being too green and emotionally driven. He had even suggested that my proposal was still amateur hour compared to professionals. Mira confirmed it. "He's trying to edge you out," she said, "but the board wants diverse perspectives, and I've insisted your concept deserves a seat." I hadn't realized Mira was also advising the Palmera Investment Committee. Her influence kept me on the list. Tension in my chest simmered into steel. This was no longer just a pitch. It was a confrontation of values, legacy, and the years of being dismissed. The week leading up to the final presentations was electric. Every firm received a window slot, 90 minutes to present, defend, and leave. Mine was scheduled the same day as Aurelius, back to back. The night before, I walked by the hollow. It was busy, lights glowing like fireflies under the industrial beams I had once bolted in myself. No one inside knew the story behind it, but I did. And I reminded myself I didn't get here on favors. I got here through grit. The elevator glided upward in perfect silence, but inside me, everything was noise. My palms were slick against the portfolio case I clutched. I had reviewed my talking points, memorized my renders, triple-checked the simulation files. But none of it compared to the feeling of standing on the edge of something irreversible. The 37th floor conference room at Palmera's Boston Tower was all glass and steel, exactly the kind of space I used to sketch as a teenager and never imagined entering. The skyline stretched beyond the windows, a city I once felt invisible inside. Now I was walking into its heart. The board members sat around a sleek black table. Mira nodded at me from the far end, her expression unreadable but steady. There were other familiar faces too, Caleb, of course, already seated in his sharp gray suit and faint smirk. David beside him scrolling through a tablet. And my mother, Karen, poised like a statue of marble and pearls. The presentations were back-to-back. Aurelius Interiors had gone first. I waited outside, staring at the horizon and breathing like a boxer before the bell. Then my name was called. I stepped in. "Good morning," I began, connecting my laptop to the screen. "I'm Eli Martin, founder of Studio Numa. I want to show you what hospitality can feel like when architecture doesn't just impress, it remembers." I walked them through the proposal: 5 boutique hotels tied to local art, natural materials. Sensory storytelling. Each design emphasized identity, memory, and sustainability, not as trends but as ethics. I showed animated walkthroughs of lobbies that changed tones by time of day, rooms that absorbed noise using fabric reclaimed from regional industries, spaces that told a story rather than followed a format. Mira gave a small nod. Others scribbled notes. When I finished, silence filled the room for a breath longer than comfort allowed. Then Caleb leaned forward. "I have a question," he said, eyes on me, but speaking to the board. "Studio Numa has only completed 4 commercial projects, none on the scale we're discussing. How do we justify assigning a multi-million-dollar portfolio to someone who hasn't managed even a hotel lobby before?" A few heads nodded. David folded his arms. "It's a fair concern. Vision's important, but we also need stability." I met Caleb's gaze. "I appreciate the question," I said calmly. "But scale doesn't always equate to success." I clicked the next slide. "These are customer reviews from 2 properties recently completed by Aurelius Interiors," I said, highlighting quotes: "generic, indistinguishable from airport hotels, simtus. Beautiful finishes, but no soul." Then I clicked again, revealing user reviews, photos, and press quotes about the Hollow and the Lantern Room, my 2 major designs. Warmth in every corner. Design that invites you in rather than showing off. "I may not have a long resume," I said, "but every project I've delivered has come in on time, under budget, and exceeded client expectations. Not one of my builds needed a second team to fix flaws. Not one left users feeling forgotten." The room quieted. "Studio Numa isn't small because it lacks capacity," I added. "It's small because it believes every space should be treated personally, not passed along a conveyor belt of contractors." I paused. "I don't want to impress people. I want to change how they feel when they enter a space." Caleb opened his mouth again, but Mira interjected. "That's enough," she said. "It wasn't a request." The board moved to deliberation. I stepped out, heart pounding in my throat. I expected nothing. 20 minutes later, the door opened. "Studio Numa," one of the executives said, stepping forward, "has been selected as our design partner for the Palmera East project." I blinked. They were still talking something about next steps, contracts, logistics, but the room blurred. Mira met my eyes and mouthed, "You did it." As the meeting ended and people began gathering their things, I noticed my mother brushing past me toward the elevator. She avoided eye contact but paused just long enough to say, "You certainly surprised us, Eli." I turned to her. I didn't come to surprise anyone. She looked at me for a long second, then turned away. It didn't hurt the way I expected, because this time I hadn't needed her to see me. I had seen myself, and it was enough. I hadn't seen Caleb since the pitch on the 37th floor. Weeks had passed. Contracts were being drawn. My calendar was filled with meetings I once only dreamed about. Mira and I were working on the early phase schematics for Palmyra East, and for the first time I was being looped into conversations with people who'd previously dismissed me as a hobbyist. But deep inside there was a noise I couldn't quiet. It came knocking one Friday evening, literally. I opened the door of my studio to find Caleb standing there. No suit, no smirk, just a sweatshirt, jeans, and a face I barely recognized in its vulnerability. "Can I come in?" he asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. He looked around at the makeshift desks, pinned sketches, and the still smudged concrete floors. "So this is it," he said quietly. "This is it." He nodded and sat on one of the old stools near my work table. There was a long silence. Then he spoke. "I didn't come to defend anything," he said. "I came because I think I finally get it." I said nothing. He exhaled. "I've spent so much time trying to be the version of me they wanted, Dad, Mom, the investors, the press. Success wasn't just expected, it was required. I didn't even stop to ask what I liked anymore. I just chased bigger titles, bigger bets, more applause." He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes downcast. "I saw what you did in that room, Eli. It wasn't just talent. It was real. And it made me feel hollow." His voice cracked slightly. "I'm sorry for stealing your work back then. I'm sorry for undermining you. But most of all, I'm sorry I never saw you as more than the kid in my rearview mirror." My throat tightened, but I didn't interrupt. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, "but if there's any way I can start doing something right, I want to try." I studied him carefully. There was no arrogance, no slickness, just someone stripped bare. "I'm not ready to forgive," I said, "but I believe in accountability." He nodded. "If you really want to make things right," I continued, "start with something that isn't about you." That night something began to shift, not in loud declarations, but in the quiet decision to break cycles. A month later, Studio Numa launched its most personal project, Numa Academy. The idea had been brewing for months, a free after-school design program for underprivileged teenagers. A space where kids like the one I once was could learn key-aid sketching, color theory, spatial thinking, without the pressure of grades or the judgment of realism. I poured myself into it, raised funds through local sponsors, repurposed studio space, built a curriculum with Mira's help. We brought in guest speakers, ran hands-on workshops, even added mental health support sessions. The day of the first class, 11 students showed up, nervous, curious, some too cool to admit they were excited. One of them stood out. His name was Theo, a wiry 16-year-old with big glasses and even bigger ideas. His notebooks were filled with wild sketches of floating cities, treehouse libraries, and underground parks. His creativity was untamed and breathtaking. But one day, Theo stopped coming. After a week I called. His voice was barely a whisper on the phone. "My dad said it's a waste of time," he murmured. "He said design is just for people who can afford to dream." My chest burned. The next day I drove to their apartment complex and asked to speak with his father. We stood in the narrow hallway and I explained what Theo was building, what he had already shown, how he solved a structural puzzle in 1 hour that had stumped 2 of our interns. His father was skeptical. "We're not rich," he said. "He needs a real job, not crayons." "He's not drawing cartoons," I replied. "He's solving problems, visualizing futures, learning how to shape the world around him. That's not dreaming, that's designing." He didn't answer right away. But Theo came back the following week. He never missed another session. And just like that, I realized this was the most important thing I'd ever built. Not a hotel, not a headline. A place where someone could see who they were becoming before the world tried to erase it. It came in the form of a voicemail polished poised exactly how I remembered her. Eli, my mother's voice, said, "I've been reading about Numa Academy. It's impressive. I'd like to talk about supporting it. Perhaps we could collaborate on expanding it, make it something the entire city recognizes. Let's not waste momentum. No apology, no acknowledgement of anything before. Just strategy, just business." For 3 days, I didn't respond. I listened to her message every morning, waiting to feel anger or guilt or longing. But what I felt was something stranger, clarity. So I called her back. She picked up on the second ring. "Eli," she said like it was a performance beginning. "I'm so glad. I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I have to decline." There was a pause. "Oh," she said coolly. "Can I ask why?" "Because I need to know I can walk on my own," I said. "I need the academy to grow without becoming another polished project for press releases." "That's ungrateful," she snapped. "After everything, I'm not ungrateful," I said gently. "In fact, I'm deeply grateful for everything I didn't have." Silence. I learned resilience because I had to build it alone. I learned to hear myself because no one else was listening. I became enough because no one tried to tell me I was. "You always twist things," she said bitterly. "You dramatize." "No," I said calmly. "I remember." She scoffed. "You think you've won something now with your articles in your little design school?" "This isn't about winning," I said. "It's about becoming." I heard her exhale. Then she said quietly, "You always were difficult to love. That one hit, but not the way it used to." "I was difficult to control," I said. "That's not the same thing." We ended the call there. No resolution, no warm parting, just truth raw and unvarnished. But what happened next surprised me. Later that evening, Caleb showed up at my apartment. No call, no warning. "I heard about the call," he said. I nodded. "Figures." He leaned against the doorframe. "I just want to say, I'm proud of you." I gave a small laugh. Took a while. He smiled, but there was something serious in his eyes. "You know, she called me after you hung up. Said she was disappointed. Said you were arrogant, self-righteous." I raised an eyebrow. "Sounds familiar." But for the first time, he said I didn't agree with her. I looked at him. I told her. He continued that maybe the real problem is her version of love. Conditional, performative, clipped at the edges of control. I told her she raised 2 sons who spent most of their lives trying to earn oxygen. That stunned me. "And what did she say?" I asked. "She hung up," he said with a small shrug. "But I don't regret it." He paused. "I used to think being the favorite meant I had it better." "But you don't," I said, holding up a hand. "We both lost different things." He nodded. "Fair." A beat passed. Then he asked, "Need help building more desks at Numa?" I smiled. "Yeah," I said, "I do. That weekend we bought wood paint and tools. We built workstations for the new intake class." He drilled. I stained. Neither of us spoke about the past, but in every screw and brushstroke something between us repaired itself wordlessly. And just like that, my family began to change, not with fanfare or reconciliation speeches, but in small, steady acts of choosing what mattered over what looked good. I was no longer seeking permission to dream. I was building a world where others didn't need permission either. It was buried at the bottom of a storage bin, wrapped in a discolored pillowcase that still smelled faintly of varnish and childhood. I found it while cleaning out the old basement studio, what used to be my first real space back when Studio Numa was just a dream stitched together with cardboard models and borrowed tools. The frame, the same one my mother had once tossed aside after it fell off my childhood bedroom wall, cracking diagonally across its wooden spine. It had held my very first architectural drawing, an awkward, lopsided sketch of a house. With too many windows and a rooftop garden I was sure would be revolutionary. I remembered taping it back together with packaging tape only for her to say, "Don't clutter your room with scraps, Eli." Then she threw it away without looking at what was inside. But somehow I had saved it. I held the broken frame in my hands again nearly 2 decades later. The glass was missing. The wood was split. The sketch inside had yellowed at the edges, but the lines were still there, shaky, hopeful, defiant. I didn't hesitate this time. I brought it to the studio and repaired it by hand. No gold leaf, no ornate restoration. Just strong glue clamps and patience. I cleaned the glass from a different discarded frame and replaced it. Then I hung it in the entrance hall of Numa Academy just above the reception desk. Beneath it on a brass plaque I engraved a single sentence. This frame was broken. So was I. But both were fixed not by gold but by grit. People asked about it all the time. I never gave the full story, just smiled and said, "It's where it all started." And in many ways it was. Not long after, Numa Academy received a grant from the Kinsley Foundation for Creative Equity, a non-profit art endowment that believed in democratizing design. With their funding, we expanded into 3 more states, opening satellite academies in Detroit, Phoenix, and Raleigh. I spent less time in client boardrooms and more in classrooms, now teaching mentoring, helping kids who reminded me of the boy I once was, the one who drew in silence, the one who waited for someone to believe in him. Instead of contracts, I reviewed portfolios. Instead of presentations, I held critique circles. Instead of winning awards, I watched students win confidence. I still designed, but mostly for joy, private commissions, community projects, public installations. The hustle was no longer about proving something. It was about building something that lasted. Mira stayed involved too. She became our creative director across regions and helped formalize our curriculum. Caleb surprisingly offered his logistics expertise to streamline the operations, always careful to stay behind the scenes. We were still rebuilding trust, but brick by brick it held. One afternoon during a quiet hour between classes, I stood alone in front of the frame. Sunlight filtered through the large studio windows and hit the old paper, making the pencil lines shimmer faintly. I thought about everything that had cracked over the years. Relationships, expectations, identities. And how not all breaks are meant to be hidden. Some are meant to be honored. This frame, once discarded, now held more than a sketch. It held a journey. A student passed by and stopped. "You drew that?" he asked, tilting his head. "I did," I replied. "How old were you, 10? He studied it for a long time. "It kinda looks like something I'd draw." I smiled. "That's the point." And he nodded, the kind of nod that meant maybe I can do this too. That night, as I locked up, I paused under the frame once more. No ceremony, no audience, just me and the memory. Not of pain, but of persistence. Because some things aren't meant to be perfect. They're meant to be real. The lights dimmed in the small auditorium that Numa Academy now called its heart. What used to be an abandoned industrial garage had been transformed into a space of light warmth and ambition. Rows of repurposed wood chairs filled with parents, teachers, community leaders, and students all gathered for the first ever semester showcase. I sat in the back row, half hidden behind a steel column. I didn't want to be the focus tonight. This wasn't about me. It was about them. The final student to present was Theo. He stepped onto the low stage wearing a wrinkled button-up and a nervous smile. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted the mic, but then he looked toward the front row where his father sat stiff but present, and where Mira gave him a small thumbs up. Then Theo began. His project slide lit up the screen behind him, the haven, a community designed for young dreamers. He cleared his throat. "This isn't just a building," he said, "it's a response. A place for kids who feel invisible to be seen. For those who are told their ideas don't matter to have space to build them anyway." He explained how the design used modular materials, sustainable energy, and adaptive reuse of neglected urban lots. The walls weren't just walls, they were chalkboards for spontaneous ideas. The ceilings mimicked open skies. There were no doors to staff rooms, only shared tables and open corners for collaboration. But then he paused, and he looked straight at the crowd. "I used to think architecture was only for the rich," he said, "for the people with suits and software and family money. I thought there was no place for a kid like me." A hush fell over the room. But then someone believed in me. Not because I had experience, but because I had a voice. Because I saw things, spaces, problems, stories, and wanted to fix them. He turned back to his slide and clicked the final image. A sketch, rough, emotional, brilliant, of a space filled with color, light, movement. A place no one would ever feel small again. "I learned that I don't have to become who others want," Theo finished. "I just have to become the person I need." Applause erupted. I sat there stunned, moved in a way I hadn't expected. Across the room, Caleb sat beside Mira, his head bowed slightly. When he looked up, he caught my eye. He gave the smallest, most genuine nod I'd ever seen from him. Not a nod of agreement, but of understanding. Something unspoken passed between us. For the first time, I felt it, not rivalry, not apology, but solidarity. Theo stepped off the stage. The kids surrounded him. His father stood slowly and walked toward his son, uncertain but willing. They didn't hug, but the hand on Theo's shoulder lingered. Later that night, after the cleanup, I found myself back in the lobby, staring again at the rusted frame. The building was quiet. Everyone had gone. But the energy still hummed in the air, like something unfinished was just beginning. I thought back to the version of me that once stood in that same spot, clutching a box of broken pencils. I remembered every silent dinner, every invisible milestone, every whisper of not enough. And yet here I was, and here they were, kids with notebooks full of rebellion, with sketches full of hope. I realized something then. Legacy isn't what you leave behind in buildings or titles or ceremonies. It's what lives on in the choices people make because of the chance you gave them. This wasn't about proving a point anymore. It was about planting one. I smiled, not because I had one, but because someone else had started.